Carrick Montgomery checked his pocket watch for the fifth time in 20 minutes, the chill Wyoming wind cutting through his Sunday coat as he stood alone on Willow Creek Station's weathered platform. He'd faced blizzards and cattle rustlers without flinching, but waiting for a mail-order bride from Boston set his calloused hands to trembling. April 1873 had brought mud season to the territory. Not the best welcome for an Eastern schoolteacher, but honest, like everything else about the life he was offering. The letter in his breast pocket had been read so many times, the creases threatened to tear. 34 was too old to be playing the nervous suitor, but too young to face the ranch alone for another decade. "Train's running late," the station master called. "Boston ladies don't always take to Wyoming dirt." "Don't need fancy," Carrick replied, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. "Need honest and hard-working." When the locomotive finally appeared in a cloud of steam and coal smoke, he didn't expect the slender woman with golden brown hair and red-rimmed eyes, nor her immediate confession, "I was dismissed from my teaching position. A scandal, not of my making, but Boston society has deemed me unsuitable." Her trembling voice awaited his rejection, but in her courage to begin with truth rather than deception, Carrick recognized something rare and valuable. "Appreciate your honesty, Miss Foster," he said after a measured pause. "Wyoming territory isn't Boston. People here judge on what they see, not what they hear." With her trembling hand in his weathered one, Amelia realized this stranger offered what Boston never had: truth without judgment. But would honesty be enough when her past caught the next train west? There's something powerful about two strangers building a life on honesty when lies would have been easier, isn't there? Carrick and Amelia's journey from practical arrangement to genuine love reminds us that true connections start with vulnerability, not perfection. When have you chosen difficult truth over comfortable deception? When has someone accepted your authentic self when others wouldn't? Share your story in the comments, because in a world of carefully curated images, real courage often looks like standing in your truth, even when it costs you something. If this Wyoming love story touched something in your heart, I'd be honored if you'd leave a like and subscribe for more tales of imperfect people finding their way to love and redemption on the American frontier. Until next time, may your foundations be as honest as Carrick's proposal and your connections as true as what grew between them. Carrick Montgomery checked his pocket watch for the fourth time in 20 minutes. The Willow Creek Station platform offered no shelter from Wyoming's spring wind, which cut through his Sunday coat like it knew he didn't belong in such finery. April 1873 had brought mud season to the territory. Not the best welcome for a Boston schoolteacher, but honest, like everything else about the life he was offering. He tucked the letter back into his breast pocket. Amelia Foster's neat handwriting having been read so many times, the creases threatened to tear. 34 was too old to be playing the nervous suitor, but too young to face the ranch alone for another decade. His parents would have had advice for this moment, if that blizzard of '56 hadn't taken them both, leaving a 17-year-old boy to become a man overnight. "Train's running late," the station master called, leaning from his window. "Winter damage to the tracks near Cheyenne. Another 20 minutes, I'd wager." Carrick nodded, adjusting his hat against the wind. The Montgomery ranch needed a woman's touch, practical things like mending and cooking, yes, but something more too. The town needed a teacher with proper credentials, and he needed, well, that was harder to admit. "Not too late to change your mind," the station master added with a knowing smirk. "Boston ladies don't always take to Wyoming dirt." "Don't need fancy," Carrick replied, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. "Need honest and hard-working." A distant whistle cut the air, and smoke appeared against the gray sky. Carrick straightened his shoulders and smoothed his beard. The train bearing his future wife was approaching, and whatever stepped off that car would shape the rest of his life. Scene 1B. The Revelation. 350 words. The locomotive hissed to a stop in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. Carrick stood back as passengers disembarked. 2 drummers with sample cases, a family returning from back east, and finally, a slender woman in a navy blue traveling suit, clutching a small valise. Her golden brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, but her eyes, a clear hazel that reminded him of September prairie grass, were red-rimmed and wary. This had to be Amelia Foster. She matched the description in her letters, though nothing had prepared him for the quiet dignity in her bearing, nor the unmistakable evidence that she'd been crying. "Miss Foster?" Carrick stepped forward, removing his hat. "Carrick Montgomery." She studied him for a moment, composing herself with visible effort. "Mr. Montgomery, you're just as you described yourself." Her voice carried the refined tones of Boston, but without the condescension he'd expected. "As are you, ma'am." He reached for her trunk, which the porter had set on the platform. "Mr. Montgomery." She placed a gloved hand on his arm, stopping him. "Before we proceed further, I must tell you something. My letters weren't entirely forthcoming." Carrick felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Wyoming wind. "I was dismissed from my teaching position 3 months ago," she continued, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "A scandal, not of my making, but—" She swallowed hard. "Boston society has deemed me unsuitable. I would understand completely if you wish to withdraw your offer." Around them, the station hummed with activity, but Carrick heard only the courage it took for this woman to speak these words to a stranger who held her future in his hands. Whatever had happened in Boston, she was facing it with honesty when lies would have been easier. "Something wrong?" he asked quietly. Tears threatened again, but she held them back. "The school board president's son made improper advances. When I refused him, he claimed I had behaved inappropriately. They believed him, of course." She stood straight, awaiting judgment, her entire future hanging on the next words from a man she'd never met. Scene 1C. The Proposal. 270 words. Carrick studied her face, searching for truth. His years on the frontier had taught him to read people, a necessary skill when handshakes meant more than contracts, and a person's word was their bond. What he saw wasn't guilt or deception, but wounded pride and the exhaustion of someone who had fought a losing battle. He took a measured breath, tasting the coal smoke and spring mud. Around them, the other passengers had dispersed, leaving them in a small island of privacy on the weathered platform. "Appreciate your honesty, Miss Foster," he finally said. "Wyoming Territory isn't Boston. People here judge on what they see, not what they hear." Hope flickered in her eyes, though she dared not trust it yet. "You're not withdrawing your offer? Starting with truth seems better than pretty lies." Carrick reached for her trunk again. "Ranch is 3 hours by wagon. Town needs a teacher. I need a wife. Offer stands if you want it." Just like that? Without knowing details? The disbelief in her voice was palpable. "Details matter less than the fact you chose to tell me. That shows character." He met her eyes directly. "My parents taught me to value honesty above all else. Lies poison a household faster than any disease." Amelia Foster stood motionless, weighing his words and the life they represented. Then, with a small nod that contained more courage than most men showed facing a loaded gun, she extended her gloved hand. "Then I accept your offer, Mr. Montgomery." He took her hand briefly, then lifted her trunk. "Carrick," he corrected. Wagons this way. Weather's turning cold. With her trembling hand in his weathered one, Amelia realized this stranger offered what Boston never had, truth without judgment. But would honesty be enough when her past caught the next train west? Réessayer H. Write Chapter 2. Content Modifier. Chapter 2. The Arrangement Scene. 2A. Wedding and Homecoming. 300 words. Judge Wilson's parlor couldn't have been more different from the grand Boston church where Amelia had once imagined her wedding. Simple furnishings, a coal stove fighting the April chill, and wildflowers in a chipped vase on the mantel. The ceremony itself took less than 5 minutes. Names exchanged, vows spoken, papers signed. No music, no guests, just the judge's wife as witness, dabbing at sentimental tears. Mrs. Montgomery, Carrick said afterward, testing the name as he helped her into the wagon. The words hung between them, strange and new. The 3-hour journey to the Montgomery ranch passed mostly in silence, but not an uncomfortable one. Carrick occasionally pointed out landmarks, the creek that never ran dry, the bluff where Sioux hunters had once made camp, the distant mountains still capped with snow. Amelia found herself studying his profile, the strong lines weathered by sun and wind, wondering what lay behind the quiet exterior. As they crested a final hill, the ranch appeared below, a sturdy 2-story house built of squared logs, a large barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a tall man emerged from the barn at the sound of wagon wheels. "That's Samuel Jenkins," Carrick explained. "Foreman. Been with the ranch since my father's time." Samuel's weathered face betrayed nothing as Carrick made introductions, but Amelia felt his assessment in his handshake, firm, brief, and non-committal. "Got the house ready," Samuel said to Carrick. Martha from town came by, fixed up the bedroom and kitchen. "Appreciate it," Carrick replied, then turned to Amelia. "Best get you inside before the weather turns." As he carried her trunk up the porch steps, Amelia caught Samuel watching her, his expression unreadable. Whatever test this was, she suspected it had just begun. Inside, a home awaited. Not hers yet, but filled with the honest possibility of becoming so. Scene 2B. School Board Meeting. 300 words. 1 week after her arrival, Amelia faced the Willow Creek School Board in the back room of the general store. 5 members, 3 men, 2 women, seated behind a rough-hewn table, her teaching credentials and letters of recommendation spread before them like evidence at a trial. Carrick stood by the door, silent but present. "Boston Latin School for Girls is certainly impressive," Rebecca Hollister said, adjusting her spectacles. As the minister's wife, her opinion carried weight. "Though I'm curious why you left such a prestigious position, Mrs. Montgomery." The question Amelia had been dreading. She glanced at Carrick, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I was dismissed," Amelia said evenly. "There was a misunderstanding with the school board president's son. I rejected his improper advances, and he retaliated with false accusations." A charged silence followed. Sheriff Grant, who doubled as board treasurer, cleared his throat. "Meaning no disrespect, ma'am, but we only have your word on that." "You have my word, too," Carrick said quietly. Every head turned. "My wife told me this before we married. I believe her." Esther Landon, the general store proprietress, tapped her pencil thoughtfully. 28 children need schooling in this town, Sheriff, Mrs. Montgomery has credentials none of us could hope to match, and we haven't had a proper teacher since Miss Wilson married that cattle buyer last fall. There's the matter of the new textbooks, added Mr. Peterson, the banker. ordered all the way from Chicago, sitting unused since January. The debate continued, with voices rising and falling. Amelia maintained her composure, answering questions about curriculum and discipline methods with calm authority. Finally, Rebecca Hollister called for a vote. 4-1 in favor, she announced. Congratulations, Mrs. Montgomery. School begins Monday next. Outside, Carrick helped Amelia into the wagon. You did well, he said simply. It wasn't vindication, but it was a start. Scene 2C, warning telegram, 300 words. By early May, rhythms had formed. Amelia taught school during the week while adapting to ranch life in the evenings and on weekends. She learned to cook on the massive cast-iron stove, helped plant the kitchen garden, and began making the house her own with small touches. Fresh curtains, arranged wild flowers, shelves organized. Carrick worked from dawn to dusk, returning home to meals at a properly set table and conversation that grew less stilted with each passing day. They maintained separate bedrooms, their marriage still a practical arrangement rather than a romantic one. Yet Amelia found herself watching for Carrick's return each evening, appreciating his quiet strength and unfailing courtesy. Saturday brought them to town for supplies. While Carrick discussed fencing with the hardware merchant, Amelia crossed to the telegraph office to send a letter to her sister in Connecticut. Franklin Peters, the telegrapher, looked up from his key with an odd expression. Mrs. Montgomery was just about to send someone to find you. Got a wire came through yesterday. He handed her a yellow slip of paper. The message was brief, but sent ice through her veins. Inquiries made about a foster stop. Boston School Board seeking information stop. Use caution. Stop. Regards. J. Thompson. J. Thompson. Janet Thompson, the only teacher who had believed Amelia's side of the story, now warning her that Boston hadn't forgotten. Everything all right, ma'am? Franklin asked, noting her pallor. Yes, thank you, Amelia managed, folding the telegram into her reticule. Outside, she nearly collided with Carrick, who steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Amelia? He rarely used her given name. What's happened? She showed him the telegram, watching his face carefully. It seems my past is following me west. Carrick's expression hardened as he read the message. Then we'd best be ready when it arrives. The telegram trembled in her hand, a harbinger of storms to come. Ray Essayer H. Write Chapter 3 Content Modifier. Chapter 3 The Revelation Scene. 3A The letter arrives, 300 words. Summer bloomed across Wyoming territory, painting the Montgomery Ranch in shades of green and gold. Amelia had settled into a routine, teaching during weekdays, tending the house and garden on weekends. The town had cautiously accepted her, impressed by her dedication to their children. Even Samuel Jenkins had thawed somewhat, occasionally joining them for supper with gruff compliments about her cornbread. Then came the July morning when Rebecca Hollister appeared at the schoolhouse door after dismissal, her face grave, an official-looking envelope in her hands. This arrived for the school board, she said, without preamble. From Boston. Amelia's fingers went cold as she accepted the envelope. Inside was a formal letter on Boston Latin School for Girls stationery, signed by Edmund Holloway, school board president. The elegant script detailed accusations so grotesquely twisted from truth that Amelia felt physically ill. Miss Foster's inappropriate relationship with a student's older brother, repeated instances of moral turpitude, dismissal for conduct unbecoming an educator. Mrs. Hollister, Amelia began, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart, these accusations are false. Rebecca's expression remained neutral. The board meets tomorrow evening. We'll expect you to address this." After the woman left, Amelia sank into her chair, the letter clutched in trembling hands. The carefully constructed life she'd begun building was threatening to collapse. When Carrick found her still sitting there an hour later, she wordlessly handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his weathered face revealing nothing until he looked up. "This Holloway," he said, his voice controlled but with an edge she'd never heard before, "claims things no decent man would put to paper about a lady." "He's protecting his son," Amelia whispered. Carrick folded the letter carefully. "Time you told me everything, Amelia. All of it." Scene 3B. Kitchen Table Truth, 350 words. They sat at the kitchen table as evening shadows lengthened, steam rising from coffee cups neither touched. Amelia's hands remained folded before her as she spoke, her voice steady despite the shame that still burned within her. William Holloway was 22, just returned from Harvard. He began appearing at school functions, always managing to find me alone. At first, I thought he was merely being friendly. She paused, gathering strength. Then came the notes, the flowers delivered to my boarding house. I returned them all, made my lack of interest clear. Carrick listened silently, his eyes never leaving her face. One afternoon in December, he cornered me in the school library. When I rejected his advances, he became forceful. Her voice faltered for the first time. I struck him with a book and fled. The next day, I was called before the board. William claimed I had been pursuing him for months, that I had invited him to the library for— She couldn't continue. "And they believed him," Carrick finished. "Of course. His father is Edmund Holloway, from one of Boston's oldest families. I was merely a teacher, a woman with no connections, no fortune." Bitterness edged her words. "I was dismissed immediately, my reputation in ruins. No school in Boston would hire me. That's when I answered your advertisement." Silence settled between them. Amelia finally raised her eyes to meet his, prepared for doubt, perhaps even disgust. Instead, she found steady resolve in Carrick's gaze. "I believe you," he said simply. 3 words she hadn't heard since the ordeal began. Something tight inside her chest began to loosen. "The board meeting tomorrow," she began. "We'll face it together," Carrick interrupted. "Your past doesn't change who you are now, Amelia. The children respect you. The town's seen your character." He reached across the table then, his calloused hand covering hers briefly. Their first real contact since their wedding. It was not a romantic gesture, but one of partnership, of standing together against injustice. "Thank you," Amelia whispered, realizing this arranged marriage had given her something Boston never had. Someone who stood beside her without question. Scene 3C, School Confrontation, 300 words. The next day brought sweltering heat and a confrontation Amelia couldn't avoid. She had just dismissed the children for lunch when Henry Peterson, the banker's son, raced back into the schoolhouse. "Mrs. Montgomery, Pa's outside with Mr. Daniels, and they look awful mad." Through the open door, Amelia saw Mr. Peterson and James Daniels, whose daughter Mary was her best student, striding toward the schoolhouse. Their expressions confirmed Henry's assessment. "Children, remain seated," Amelia instructed, smoothing her skirts as she moved to the doorway. "Mrs. Montgomery," Peterson began without greeting, "my wife has just informed me about certain allegations from your previous position." "As has mine," Daniels added, his normally friendly face hard with suspicion. "We cannot have someone of questionable character teaching our children." Amelia felt the curious eyes of her students behind her. "Gentlemen, this is hardly the appropriate place." "The appropriate place is anywhere that concerns the moral welfare of our children," Peterson interrupted. "The board may be meeting tonight, but as parents, we demand your immediate resignation." The unfairness burned like a physical pain. Amelia thought of fleeing, of surrendering as she had in Boston. Instead, she straightened her spine, channeling the quiet strength she'd observed in Carrick. "I will not resign," she said clearly, loud enough for the children to hear. "The accusations against me are false, born of spite and lies. I have conducted myself with nothing but propriety, both in Boston and here." "You were dismissed," Daniels began. "I was wronged," Amelia countered. "And I will not be wronged again. If you wish to remove me, you'll need the full board's decision. Until then, I have 28 children awaiting their arithmetic lesson." With that, she turned and walked back into the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Her hand shook as she picked up the chalk, but her voice remained steady as she continued the day's lessons. Scene 3D, Carrick's investigation, 250 words. While Amelia fought her battle at the schoolhouse, Carrick Montgomery sat in Sheriff Grant's office, a telegram form before him. He'd ridden into town at dawn, determined to find truth that could stand against Holloway's accusations. "You're certain about this?" Grant asked, reading the message Carrick had drafted. "Telegrams to Boston don't come cheap." "I'm certain," Carrick replied. "My wife deserves better than judgment based on one man's word." By late afternoon, Carrick was waiting at the telegraph office when Franklin Peters' machine clattered to life. The response came from a Boston lawyer Carrick had once helped with cattle purchases, a man who owed him a favor and had connections throughout the city's legal circles. Franklin's eyebrows rose as he transcribed the incoming message. "Interesting reading, Mr. Montgomery," he commented, handing over the completed form. Carrick read it twice, his suspicions confirmed. Edmund Holloway's son had a history. 3 previous teachers had left Boston Latin School for Girls under similar circumstances, all after rejecting William Holloway's advances. None had fought back, silenced by settlements and threats of ruined reputations. As Carrick mounted his horse for the ride to the evening's board meeting, the telegram secure in his pocket, he found himself thinking about the woman who had come into his life as a practical arrangement. Her courage in the face of injustice, her dignity despite humiliation, her gentle firmness with the children, Amelia Montgomery was proving to be far more than merely a convenient wife. She deserved vindication, and he intended to ensure she received it. Resayer H. Write Chapter 4, Content Modifier. Chapter 4, The Challenge. Scene 4A, Pre-vote lobbying, 300 words. The hours before the school board meeting found Carrick and Amelia moving through town with purpose. While Amelia prepared her defense in the quiet of the schoolhouse, Carrick visited key community members, telegram in hand. His first stop was Martha Wilson, the midwife whose opinion carried weight with the town's women. 3 other teachers, Martha said, shaking her head as she read the telegram, and all hushed up with Holloway money. "Can you speak with Rebecca Hollister? She respects you," Carrick asked. Martha's eyes flashed. "I delivered her children. I'll do more than speak with her." Carrick next visited Esther Landon at the general store, then Franklin Peters, whose position as telegrapher made him privy to many town secrets. By mid-afternoon, he had secured promises of support from several influential citizens. Meanwhile, Amelia received an unexpected visitor at the schoolhouse. Sheriff Grant entered, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Montgomery, thought you should know. I sent inquiries to a lawman friend in Boston." He cleared his throat. His reply came this morning. Seems this William Holloway has a reputation with young ladies in positions beneath his social standing. Hope flickered in Amelia's chest. You believe me, then? Let's say I've developed reasonable doubt about Mr. Holloway's claims. He replaced his hat. Town needs a good teacher. My boys have learned more these past months than the whole year before. By evening, as Amelia and Carrick walked together toward the meeting, they were no longer alone. Martha Wilson fell into step beside them, then the blacksmith and his wife, followed by several parents whose children had flourished under Amelia's teaching. Whatever happens, Carrick said quietly as they approached the town hall, remember, you don't stand alone. Amelia straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from the man beside her and the unexpected allies surrounding them. For the first time since the letter arrived, she allowed herself to hope. Scene 4B, public hearing, 350 words. The town hall, normally used for dances and socials, had been arranged with the school board seated at a table facing rows of chairs. Nearly every seat was filled. Those who couldn't find chairs stood along the walls. Amelia felt the weight of every gaze as she took her place before the board. Carrick, a solid presence behind her. Rebecca Hollister called the meeting to order, her face carefully neutral. We're gathered to address concerns about Mrs. Montgomery's fitness as our teacher in light of information received from her previous employer. The damning letter was read aloud, each word like a physical blow. When finished, Rebecca looked up. Mrs. Montgomery, you may speak in your defense. Amelia stood, grateful for the months of teaching that had trained her voice to carry to the back of a room. The accusations in that letter are false. William Holloway made unwanted advances which I rejected. In retaliation, he convinced his father I was the pursuer. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mr. Peterson leaned forward. That's a serious charge against a respected Boston family. Do you have any proof? I do. Carrick stepped forward, presenting the telegram to the board. My inquiries reveal that 3 teachers before my wife left Boston Latin under similar circumstances, all after rejecting young Mr. Holloway's attentions. As Rebecca read the telegram aloud, the mood in the room shifted perceptibly. Mary Daniels, age 12, suddenly stood from her chair. Mrs. Montgomery is the best teacher we've ever had, she declared with childish conviction. She wouldn't do anything wrong. James Daniels, who had confronted Amelia just the day before, looked startled at his daughter's outburst, then thoughtful. I move we put this matter to vote, Esther Landon said firmly. I've seen nothing in Mrs. Montgomery's conduct here that suggests anything but the highest character. The vote was called. One by one, each board member voiced their decision. In favor of retaining Mrs. Montgomery, announced Rebecca Hollister, tallying the results. 4 votes to 1. Relief washed over Amelia in a dizzying wave. She felt Carrick's hand at her elbow, steadying her as congratulations came from all sides. Outside, the first snowflakes of an early autumn storm began to fall, unnoticed in the warmth of vindication. Scene 4C, Victory Celebration, 300 words. The Willow Creek Saloon, normally no place for respectable women, made an exception that night. The front room was cleared of gambling tables, and Martha Wilson firmly established that no hard liquor would be served while ladies were present. Townsfolk crowded in, the school board vote having evolved into an impromptu community celebration. To Mrs. Montgomery, Sheriff Grant called, raising his glass of cider. The finest teacher this territory has seen, and a lady of unquestionable character. Cheers erupted as Amelia blushed, unused to being the center of such positive attention. And to Mr. Montgomery, added Esther Landon with a knowing smile, for standing by his wife with such conviction. More cheers followed. Carrick, uncomfortable with the attention, merely nodded acknowledgment. As the evening progressed, Amelia found herself surrounded by mothers thanking her for their children's progress, while Carrick received approving claps on the shoulder from men who respected his stand for justice. The practical arrangement they'd begun, months ago, had transformed them, in the town's eyes, into something they weren't quite yet in truth, a devoted couple. "You've won them over completely," Carrick observed quietly when they finally had a moment alone near the window. Outside, snow was falling more heavily, unusual for early October. "We've won them over," Amelia corrected. "I couldn't have faced this alone." Something shifted in Carrick's expression, a softening around his eyes that made Amelia suddenly aware of how close they stood, how the months of shared meals and conversations had created a bond neither had anticipated. The moment was broken by Samuel Jenkins approaching with news about the storm. "Best head back to the ranch soon," he advised. "This snow's setting in to stay a while." As they prepared to leave, Amelia caught Carrick watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Their victory had changed something between them, but what that meant remained to be seen. Scene 4D, Unwelcome Arrival, 250 words. The celebration was winding down when the saloon door opened, bringing a gust of cold air and swirling snowflakes. Conversation halted as a distinguished gentleman in an Eastern coat and hat stamped snow from his boots. Behind him, a younger man struggled with leather trunks. "Dreadful weather," the older man announced to no one in particular, his Boston accent immediately apparent. "I require accommodation, and was directed to inquire here." Amelia froze, her glass nearly slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Though she had never met him in person, she knew instantly who stood before them. "Mr. Holloway, I presume," Sheriff Grant said, stepping forward. "Edmund Holloway?" The man looked pleased to be recognized. "Indeed. And you are?" "Sheriff Thomas Grant. May I ask your business in Willow Creek?" Holloway removed his gloves deliberately. "A matter of moral obligation, Sheriff. I've come concerning your schoolteacher." His gaze swept the room, settling on Amelia with cold recognition. "Ah, Miss Foster. Or Mrs. Montgomery now, I understand." The silence in the room was absolute. Carrick moved to Amelia's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "As school board president in Boston," Holloway continued, addressing the room at large, "I felt it my duty to personally ensure your community understands the grave mistake you're making. I've brought documentation that will remove any doubt about this woman's character." He smiled thinly, snow melting on his expensive coat. "I've come to protect your children from a most dangerous woman." With the first winter storm bearing down, a more dangerous threat had arrived. Rasayer H. Write Chapter 5. Content. Modifier. Chapter 5. The Doubt Scene. 5A. Poisoned Minds. 300 words. Edmund Holloway wasted no time. Within 3 days of his arrival, he had taken rooms at the town's small hotel and established himself as a figure of Eastern respectability. His Harvard education, flawless manners, and apparent concern for the community's welfare opened doors throughout Willow Creek. "Simply a matter of protecting innocent children," he explained to the Ladies' Aid Society over tea at Rebecca Hollister's home. "No reflection on your judgment, of course. Miss Foster, Mrs. Montgomery now, was quite skilled at concealing her true nature in Boston as well." He produced letters, carefully selected correspondence that, taken out of context, suggested impropriety. He shared confidential details of the Boston investigation, embellished to paint Amelia in the worst possible light. His refined accent and sorrowful demeanor made even outrageous claims seem plausible. "And the young man she attempted to seduce?" asked Martha Wilson, deliberately baiting him. "My son," Holloway admitted with practiced reluctance. "William was engaged to a lovely girl from a fine family. Miss Foster pursued him relentlessly, threatened to create scandal if he didn't break his engagement. When he refused her advances, she became vindictive." By week's end, Holloway had spoken with most of the influential citizens. The school board, despite their previous vote, agreed to reconsider Amelia's position. Parents began keeping children home from school, creating painful gaps in Amelia's classroom. Carrick observed the town's shifting sentiment with grim understanding. "Man knows what he's doing," he told Amelia as they rode home in tense silence after learning 3 more students had been withdrawn. "Using the same tactics that worked in Boston, turning people against you with half-truths and insinuations." "And it's working again," Amelia said quietly, watching snowflakes gather on her gloves. The early winter storm had passed, but the chill it left behind seemed to have settled into the community's heart. "Not completely," Carrick replied. "Not yet." Scene 5B, Ranch Discussion, 300 words. The barn offered shelter from the biting November wind as Carrick mended tack, his hands working mechanically while his mind churned with darker thoughts. Beyond the open door, he could see additional snow clouds gathering over the distant mountains. Winter was arriving early and harsh, much like the troubles Holloway had brought to their door. He didn't immediately register the voices from the other side of the barn wall, Samuel Jenkins and 2 ranch hands, their words carrying clearly in the cold air. "Ruining the Montgomery name," one hand was saying. "My sister pulled her kids from school yesterday. Says where there's smoke, there's fire." "Town's talking," agreed the other. "Saying the boss married a woman with a past. Bad for business." Samuel's voice cut in. "Mind your tongues. That's the boss's wife you're discussing." "Just saying what everyone's thinking, Samuel." "Boss inherited his pa's good name along with this ranch. Now he's throwing it away on some Eastern woman nobody really knows." "Mortgage coming due in spring," the first hand continued. "Cattlemen's Association might not be so eager to do business if there's scandal attached to the Montgomery name." Carrick's hands stilled on the leather reins. The mortgage. His father's legacy. The ranch that had been in the Montgomery family since Wyoming was just wilderness. All potentially at risk because he'd chosen to stand by Amelia. "Boss made his choice," Samuel said finally. "Not our place to question it. Even if it costs him everything his pa built?" The conversation moved on to other matters, but Carrick remained motionless, the implications weighing on him like a physical burden. Defending Amelia had seemed straightforward when it was just her teaching position at stake. Now it threatened the ranch, his livelihood, his family's legacy. For the first time since their marriage, doubt crept into his mind like the winter cold seeping through his coat. Scene 5C, Public Declaration, 300 words. Sunday morning brought the community together at Willow Creek's simple white church. Amelia felt the stairs as she and Carrick took their usual pew, noted the deliberate space other parishioners left around them. Edmund Holloway sat prominently near the front, acknowledged with respectful nods by many who had celebrated Amelia's vindication just weeks before. Reverend Hollister's sermon on truth and deception carried thinly veiled references that caused heated color to rise in Amelia's cheeks. Beside her, Carrick sat rigid, his face unreadable. When the service concluded, Holloway rose to speak with the minister, their heads bent in what appeared to be serious conversation. Watching them, Amelia felt a wave of despair. History was repeating itself, her word against the Holloways, with the same inevitable outcome. "I should leave," she whispered to Carrick as they prepared to depart. "Your ranch, you're standing here. I'm causing damage to everything you've built." Carrick didn't respond immediately. His expression troubled as he regarded the congregants filing past, many avoiding eye contact. She had seen his distance growing over the past days, sensed his internal struggle. Then, as Holloway's voice rose in apparent righteous concern, something hardened in Carrick's eyes. He stopped in the center aisle, turned, and cleared his throat loudly. "Folks," he called, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations, "got something to say." The church fell silent, all eyes turning toward the normally reserved rancher. "Some of you have known me all my life, known my father before me. Montgomerys have always valued two things above all, honesty and standing by our own." He looked directly at Holloway, then at the congregation. "I believe my wife. I stand by her, and I love her." The last words hung in the air, surprising even Amelia. In their months of marriage, practical and increasingly companionable, he had never spoken of love. "If this town can't accept her truth, we'll build our lives elsewhere." Rasayer H. Write Chapter 6. Content Modifier. Chapter 6. The Alliance Scene. 6A. Gathering Support, 300 words. The November afternoon following Carrick's church declaration brought unexpected visitors to the Montgomery ranch. Martha Wilson arrived first, her buggy crunching through fresh snow, medical bag in hand, though no one had sent for her. "Thought I might check on your winter stores," she explained briskly, though her eyes held deeper purpose. Hard season ahead. She was helping Amelia inventory dried herbs when Samuel Jenkins announced more arrivals. Sheriff Grant and Franklin Peters, the telegrapher, both looking grave. "Unusual business brings you gentlemen," Carrick observed as they gathered around the kitchen table, coffee steaming in mismatched cups. "Unusual times," Sheriff Grant replied. He produced a folded paper from his coat. "Got a reply to some inquiries I made about our distinguished visitor." The telegram revealed that Edmund Holloway's position on the Boston School Board was under scrutiny following complaints from parents about his son's behavior toward female students. Franklin Peters leaned forward. "That's not all. Been holding messages for Mr. Holloway since his arrival. Several from Boston lawyers, tone suggesting he left town ahead of some legal troubles. I've delivered 3 babies to teachers at girls' schools over the years," Martha added quietly. "Young women who disappeared from Boston suddenly. Each refused to name the father, but I have my suspicions now." Amelia's hand trembled around her coffee cup. "You believe me, then?" "All of you?" "We believe evidence," Sheriff Grant said firmly, "and character. You've shown yours these past months. Holloway's revealing his now." Samuel Jenkins, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Boss, the hands are with you, whatever comes." Carrick looked at each face around his kitchen table. Allies gathered when he'd expected abandonment. His gaze lingered longest on Amelia, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief. "Then we need a strategy," he said, "because Holloway isn't leaving until he's forced out or gets what he came for." Outside, the wind shifted, bringing heavier snow clouds from the mountains. Scene 6B. Strategy Formation, 300 words. As afternoon deepened toward evening, the kitchen table became a war council. Maps of the town and surrounding territory were spread beside plates of Amelia's fresh bread and cold venison. Lamps were lit against the early darkness of approaching winter. Holloway's scheduled another town meeting for Friday, Sheriff Grant explained, claiming to have final evidence of Mrs. Montgomery's unsuitability. He'll use the same approach that worked in Boston, Amelia said. His word against mine, with his social position tipping the scales. Franklin Peters tapped the telegram before him. Except we have something Boston didn't. Evidence of a pattern. If other teachers were similarly accused, we need their testimony, Martha Wilson concluded, or at least sworn statements. Which would take weeks we don't have, Carrick pointed out. A contemplative silence fell, broken by Samuel Jenkins. What if we don't need to discredit his accusations? What if we focus on his son instead? All eyes turned to the weathered foreman. Mrs. Montgomery wasn't his first victim, Samuel continued. Probably won't be his last. A man protecting his son's reputation might be forgiven. A man enabling his son's continued predatory behavior is another matter. Janet Thompson, Amelia said suddenly. The teacher who warned me. She kept records, dates, incidents, names of other affected teachers. She was building a case, but feared losing her position. Would she send these records? Carrick asked. For the right cause, yes, Amelia replied. But it would take weeks. Unless, Franklin Peters smiled slowly, I could send a priority telegram to the Boston office. Expedited document delivery by rail. Expensive, but possible. Sheriff Grant nodded decisively. I'll cover the cost. Official investigation. As they refined their plan, Amelia found herself watching Carrick. His quiet authority, the respect these people showed him, the loyalty he commanded not through demands, but through character. Their practical arrangement had evolved into something she hadn't dared hope for, a partnership of equals, facing adversity together. Outside, the first heavy snowflakes of a new storm began to fall. Scene 6C, Blizzard Rescue, 300 words. 3 days later, their strategy was set. Janet Thompson had telegraphed confirmation. Documents were on their way, due to arrive before Holloway's town meeting. The weather, however, had other plans. The storm that began during their planning session had intensified into a full blizzard. Wind howled around the Montgomery ranch house, driving snow into drifts taller than a man. For 2 days, they had been effectively isolated, the road to town impassable. If this keeps up, there won't be a town meeting, Samuel observed as he and Carrick checked supplies in the barn. No one's traveling in this. The crack of a rifle shot cut through the storm's roar. Both men froze, listening. Another shot followed, a distress signal. Someone's out in this, Carrick said, already reaching for his heavy coat. Despite Samuel's protests, Carrick saddled his strongest horse. Whoever was desperate enough to travel in such conditions needed help immediately. He rode into the teeth of the storm, following the sound of a third shot. A quarter-mile from the ranch, he found a snow-covered wagon stuck axle-deep in a drift. The driver, nearly invisible in the swirling white, was attempting to free the frozen wheels. "Hello, the wagon," Carrick called above the wind. The figure turned, revealing a face Carrick had come to despise. Edmund Holloway, his refined Boston clothing utterly inadequate against Wyoming's winter fury. "Montgomery?" Holloway's voice was weak with cold. "Thank God. I was attempting to reach town when the storm worsened." For one dark moment, Carrick considered leaving the man who had tried to destroy Amelia's reputation. The blizzard would cover all evidence by morning. Instead, he dismounted. "Your hands are freezing. Take my gloves. We need to get you to shelter." "My papers," Holloway protested weakly. "My valise." "Your life first," Carrick said firmly. "Papers won't matter if you're dead." As they struggled toward the ranch, Carrick reflected on the strange justice of the situation. Holloway, who had brought such cold calculation to harm Amelia, was now dependent on her husband's mercy for survival. Raysayer H. Write Chapter 7. Content Modifier. Chapter 7. The Truth Scene. 7a. Kitchen Table. Confrontation. 350 words. Edmund Holloway sat wrapped in blankets before the kitchen fire, his hands curled around a cup of Martha Wilson's medicinal tea. The color had returned to his face, though his expression remained guarded as he regarded the unexpected gathering around the Montgomery kitchen table. "Most fortunate you found me, Mr. Montgomery," he said, his cultured voice at odds with his disheveled appearance. "The blizzard came on more suddenly than I anticipated." "Wyoming weather shows no respect for Eastern schedules," Martha replied dryly. "You're lucky to have all your fingers and toes." Amelia entered from the pantry, carrying a tray of food. Her steps faltered briefly at the sight of her accuser in her kitchen, but she recovered quickly, setting the tray before him with quiet dignity. "You should eat, Mr. Holloway," she said evenly. "The storm shows no sign of breaking before morning." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "I find it ironic to be accepting hospitality from the woman whose reputation you've been systematically destroying," Sheriff Grant interrupted, emerging from the shadows by the door. "Interesting perspective." Holloway straightened, discomfort giving way to indignation. "I assure you, Sheriff, my concerns about Mrs. Montgomery are entirely justified. In my valise, which Mr. Montgomery kindly retrieved, I have documentation." "Fabricated documentation," Franklin Peters interjected, producing several telegrams from his pocket. "We've been making inquiries of our own, Mr. Holloway." The Boston man's composure faltered momentarily. "Whatever you may have heard is nothing compared to what we've read," Martha Wilson said, placing a worn leather journal on the table. "This arrived by special courier yesterday, just ahead of the storm." Holloway stared at the journal, recognition and alarm flashing across his face. "Janet Thompson's record of your son's behavior toward female teachers," Amelia explained quietly. "Every incident, every victim, every cover-up, meticulously documented over 3 years. She was quite thorough," Sheriff Grant added. "Names, dates, witness statements from 5 teachers besides Mrs. Montgomery, all describing the same pattern of behavior from your son, followed by the same pattern of intimidation from you." Holloway's face had gone pale again, but not from cold. "You have no right." "We have every right," Carrick said, his voice calm but firm. "Just as you claim to be protecting our children, we're protecting our teacher. The difference is, our concern is genuine." Martha opened the journal. "Shall we begin with April 1871, the case of Miss Eleanor Simmons?" Scene 7b, Holloway's Confession, 350 words. Snow pummeled the windows as night deepened, the blizzard isolating the Montgomery ranch house from the rest of the world. For nearly 2 hours, Martha had read from Janet Thompson's journal, detailing case after case of William Holloway's predatory behavior and his father's systematic cover-ups. Edmund Holloway's imperious facade had crumbled with each account. Now he sat slumped in his chair, the tea cold before him, his expression that of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. "These are private matters," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Family concerns." "They became public matters when you made them so," Amelia replied. "When you destroyed innocent women's reputations to protect your son." "I was protecting the Holloway name," he snapped, a flash of his former arrogance returning. "A name that has stood for excellence in Boston for 3 generations. "At the expense of how many young women?" Martha asked quietly. Silence fell, broken only by the wind's howl and the crackling fire. "William needs help," Holloway admitted finally, his voice barely audible. After his mother died, he changed. I thought he would outgrow these impulses. Instead, you enabled them, Sheriff Grant observed. Punished his victims instead of addressing his behavior. Holloway's shoulders sagged. What would you have had me do? Expose my only son to public disgrace? Destroy his future? You were willing to destroy mine, Amelia said without rancor, and the futures of every other teacher who rejected William's advances. The older man looked at her directly for the first time. What do you want from me? Money? A public apology? The truth, Carrick said simply. A written statement acknowledging that my wife's dismissal was unjust based on false accusations, and your immediate return to Boston once the storm breaks. Why would I agree to such terms? Sheriff Grant cleared his throat. Because the alternative is pressing charges. Janet Thompson's journal contains enough evidence for criminal proceedings against both you and your son. Holloway stared into the fire for a long moment, defeat etched in every line of his face. I'll need paper and ink, he said finally. As Amelia retrieved writing materials, she caught Carrick's eye across the room. In his steady gaze, she found not just vindication, but something deeper, respect, partnership, and the love he had declared so unexpectedly in the church. Scene 7C, New Life, 300 words. Spring came late to Wyoming Territory in 1874, but when it arrived, it transformed the landscape with startling swiftness. Snowmelt-fed rushing streams, wildflowers carpeted the prairie, and at the Montgomery Ranch, new life took root in more ways than one. Edmund Holloway had departed with the breaking of the blizzard, leaving behind his signed confession and retraction. The document, publicly read at a town meeting, had restored Amelia's standing completely. With Holloway's reputation now in question, rather than hers, the community had rallied around their teacher with renewed appreciation. But the most profound changes had occurred within the ranch house itself. The separate bedrooms had given way to shared quarters, the practical arrangement evolving into a true marriage built on hard-won trust and deepening affection. Now, as May sunshine streamed through open windows, Martha Wilson emerged from the bedroom with a blanket-wrapped bundle. "A perfect son," she announced to Carrick, who had been pacing the kitchen floor for hours. Strong lungs, all fingers and toes accounted for. She placed the newborn in his father's arms. Carrick, who had faced down blizzards and confrontations without flinching, looked terrified, holding the tiny form. "Go on," Martha urged with a smile. "Amelia's asking for you both." He entered the bedroom carefully. Amelia lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant. When she saw Carrick with their son, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "James," she said softly, as Carrick sat gently beside her. "After your father." "James Montgomery," Carrick agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "A fine Wyoming name." Outside their window, spring winds rustled new leaves, nature's reminder that after the harshest winters come renewal and growth. Amelia took Carrick's free hand in hers, marveling at how their practical arrangement had grown into something neither could have ordered from any catalog. Something honest, hard-won, and true. As James Montgomery took his first breath in a world still wild but full of possibility, Carrick knew the mail-order bride who had arrived in tears less than a year ago had given him far more than he'd ever dared hope for. A family, a future, and a love as vast as the Wyoming sky. Well, friend, we've journeyed together from that windy train platform to the warm cradle of new life, watching as two strangers became something neither could have imagined. If your heart feels both full and tender now, know that mine does too. Carrick and Amelia's story has left me contemplating how often we hide our truths, fearing judgment that might never come. There's something about the frontier that strips away pretense, isn't there? In 1873 Wyoming, survival depended on seeing things as they were, not as you wished them to be. Carrick and Amelia began with stark honesty because they had to, but discovered that truth, even painful truth, forms a foundation that can weather any storm. Their practical arrangement blossomed into love, not despite their honesty, but because of it. How different might our own connections be if we approached them with such courage? What struck me most while crafting this story was how judgment nearly destroyed what honesty had built. Edmund Holloway brought the weight of Boston society's expectations to Wyoming, wielding propriety as a weapon. Yet, when confronted with evidence of his own son's misdeeds, even he found a kind of redemption through finally facing truth. Sometimes the person we most need to be honest with is ourselves. The mail-order bride story has been told countless times, usually beginning with deception, the pretty lies we tell to make ourselves desirable. But Carrick and Amelia showed us another way, that relationships built on seeing and accepting each other's whole selves, flaws, scandals, and all, might be the strongest kind. Perhaps that's as true today as it was on the Wyoming frontier, where blizzards had no respect for pretty illusions. Thank you for walking this path with Carrick and Amelia. Their journey from practical arrangement to enduring love reminds us that second chances aren't just given, they're built, choice by choice, truth by truth, day by day. And sometimes the most beautiful lives grow from the most honest hearts. Has Carrick and Amelia's story touched something in you about the power of honesty in relationships? I believe we all face moments when the harder truth feels too risky, when we're tempted to hide parts of ourselves to be accepted. When have you taken the risk of being fully honest when it would have been easier to conceal? Or when has someone's honesty with you, even when difficult, ultimately strengthened your connection? Share your experience in the comments below. Our stories of vulnerability and acceptance deserve to be honored, whether they happened in 1873 Wyoming or in your relationships today. If this tale of a marriage that began with honesty rather than illusion resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and consider subscribing. The American frontier was filled with extraordinary ordinary people finding their way to connection against all odds, and I'd be honored to share more of their stories with you. Until next time, may your foundations be honest and your hearts as true as the Wyoming sky.